Thanks for tuning in to Season 4 of Strange, Rare, and Peculiar Homeopathy Podcast, where homeopathy lives, breathes, and evolves with Denise Straiges and Alastair Gray. We'll be exploring modern practice, research, and philosophy, from Hahnemann's radical insights to today's breakthroughs and discoveries. Get ready for homeopathy woes, feedback from pros, and the more you knows.
Hello, greetings, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Alastair Gray. I have muesli in my teeth. I'm the academic director at the Academy of Muesli and a research director at the Institute for the Advancement of Muesli.
Exactly. What?
How about you? Who are you?
Oh, how about me? So I am Denise Straiges, and I am from the Institute of Tea and Toast, homemade pottery. Thank you very much. And homemade sourdough bread. If you are a gluten-free sourdough person, man, I got to talk to you. What's her name? Arya. I should have her name. She has the best recipes for gluten-free sourdough. Anyway, I am the president and clinical director of AHE, the Academy of Homeopathy Education, and the Institute for the Advancement of Homeopathy, which is an advocacy organization 100% dedicated to the betterment of homeopathy, which includes education, access to clinical services, high quality research in clinical studies, in outcomes, clinical stuff. I can't even talk today. I have it in my tea or my toast. In education, in the intellectual history of homeopathy, in the intersection of homeopathy and biomedicine, the profession of homeopathy, all the things, advocacy, safety. This is important. This stuff is not candy, people. We are rigorous for a reason. We curate a library. Alastair has decided that he is going to take on the library space for his own personal podcast studio. I love it. And then we raise money for scholarships. We operate on a really tight budget. We're a 501c3. We are a charity. And what we do is every year we collect all the money and then we try to pay everybody as fair a wage as possible, including us, I hope. And then the rest goes back. It goes back to students to augment tuition and also care grants. And we raise money for care grants. Wow. Big intro. We have a great topic for today. If you listened last week, this is the extension of the last 2 weeks, actually. We talked about case analysis. Then we talked about the case management. And now today we're going to talk about sort of expectations in outcomes and what constitutes this idea of quote unquote cure. What should we expect? What is there really, this magic that people attribute to homeopathy? So we're going to talk about that. First, before we get started, we have a live Q&A. I also have a barking dog outside of my door that I have to let in because it's 700 degrees outside my house.
Well, I'll just take over. So you do that. It is not 700 degrees. It is 41 centigrade. 41 centigrade at 11:30 a.m. on July 3rd on the east coast of the USA. And she's back.
And she's back.
And it's over 100 and it's hot like the sun. Yeah, the animals are struggling somewhat. The cats are lethargic today, huh?
And hopefully Hildegard of Bingen does not decide that she needs to sit on my lap because, as you listeners know, I don't like fur on my lap when it's 100 degrees.
Well, her hot breath is going to just be awesome.
Hot breath. Anyway, live Q&A.
Hot tuna breath.
Tuna breath. My gosh. I hope I don't have hot tuna breath. And I hope you, actually, I hope you don't have hot tuna breath. But that's not why we're sitting in separate places. It's for your audio enjoyment, dear listeners. Anyway, live Q&A on July 8th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the United States. That's
what is that? Q&A for what?
Becoming a homeopath, studying homeopathy.
And so a Q&A essentially about the school that we run,
yeah.
Why you want to be in it, and what are the reasons that you want to be in it.
There's a lot of pretend homeopathy out there. There's a lot of cosplay homeopathy happening. Schools trying to dumb down the points of entry, making up what happens when a person takes a remedy. It's okay if they break out in sores from head to toe. Spoiler alert. It's not.
Nope. Or, what did I hear this week? A clinical session that begins with the prompt. Tell me about your life. Oh, wow.
and making clinics live to anyone who can. That is a breach of ethics beyond. If the person says, I'm okay with it, that's like a peep show. I don't know what is the purpose of that other than being an internet. Like, do you want to have a gynecology session online? Maybe some people do. I shouldn't use that example, but like, I just don't think it's appropriate. I
There
think
would be some Veratrum albums, some Hyoscyamus and some Lithium Tigrinum clients, people that need those remedies that might enjoy that somewhat.
remember we had that client one time. She said she would do anything
If there's a camera.
if there's a camera on her. That was great. Anyway, yeah, so we've got this Q&A where people can come and ask us questions. Like if you want to study homeopathy, you need to ask a lot of questions before you do it. So come join us on July 8th, 7 p.m. Eastern. There will be a link in the show notes for how to sign up for that. Also, I am super excited because I'm teaching Comfort Care practitioner course again, July 22nd and 29th. This is basically homeopathy hospice. It's a program that I developed along with my colleague, Molly Punzo, Dr. Molly Punzo, she's just one of my dearest friends. I love her. We became deaf doulas together along with our other colleague, Molly Erlinger, a couple of years ago, 2 summers ago, in an attempt to learn about what it's like to provide bedside supportive care to people in their last weeks and hours. And then I developed this course that is basically, as I said, homeopathy hospice. And I really love it. I learned so much doing it and I just can't wait to share it. Anyway, sign up links are in the show notes for that as well. If you have plans for
Comfort Care, people.
Comfort Care.
Be there.
I just said, I said, if you have a quancer, which was a question or we will answer it. If you have a question you would like us to answer on a future episode, leave us a comment. We do our best to read all of them. We read them all. We try to respond to as many as we can. All right, let's do it.
Quancer.
A quancer. A quancer is like a question and an answer combined. Maybe that's like if you're too hyped up to listen to the whole question, you just quancer. It's like mansplaining. I think mansplaining is a quancer.
Oh, only for a specific audience, target audience.
Do you get mansplained?
Rarely. I've been mansplained in relationship to homeopathy by some, let's say, medically qualified practitioners that feel that my education and breadth needs some work. But rarely. Very rarely. I've never been mansplained by anyone who matters.
Have I been mansplained? Daily, on the regular. How do people feel after they mansplain me? I don't know, because they don't listen, because they quancer me. I
always thought that Denise overcooked this sensitivity or susceptibility that she has, because she's red hot susceptible to the mansplain. And then it just happens. And I observe it and I go, oh my God, are you calm down. You're walking into a viper nest.
It's me. You're saying that. Yeah.
Yeah. You are about to get your head bitten off, buddy.
Oh my God.
Slow down.
I don't enjoy it. Let's just say I got mansplained online this week. Somebody on the AT. Some guy started saying things and he tagged me personally. I don't even look at social media. I mean, I like Instagram for house stuff. I really like renovation things and I like food things and whatever. I don't really follow homeopathy stuff online because I don't think it's good for my blood pressure. But this guy, he tagged me and he just said, you don't know. That's how we start. You don't know. And I was like, oh, no.
For those of you without a visual, you're just getting the left-handed Italian, whatever that is.
Because I don't even know words. So let's get into it because this is what we're actually, what's really funny? This may have sounded like a long wind up, like the guy who said, I'll give you one more try, but you talk for 10 minutes before you really get started.
Stop.
Sorry. That's the free education we provide. Do you want it in a lecture format, all segmented on the minute? Come and study. Anyway,
a phenomenon that goes on in homeopathy. Let me just contextualize it. And all right. So for, I was going to say hundreds of years, and it is actually a couple of hundred years since there's been a student and a teacher of homeopathy, the teacher has been using stories to bring this thing to life. And it's, of course, a typical educational technique to enliven proceedings and sometimes take something from the sleepy zone to the I'm totally engaged zone.
The sleepy zone.
The sleepy
Like
zone.
that. The sleepy zone.
Because if you read the symptoms of arsenicum, they will send you to the sleepy place.
Yes.
However, if you get your students over to the window and point down at the street and say, look, there's Mr. Arsenicum. Look, he's got his cane, his silver-headed cane, and his meticulous Lenin beard. And,
he's got to come into your office and arrange the pictures.
But to create a story around some facts is a very common thing in our profession. And over the years, it's not only with the study of materia medica, but various other things as well. And, I have to say that I would use plenty of stories, have used plenty of clinical stories in my early teaching years. I remember having this experience in Perth in Australia once. I don't know if I've told you this. And I've essentially got 3.5 hours of material out of this one video. And I'm doing a clinical training session, old style video. And this guy is telling me about his presented complaint. And his presented complaint is that he's got a pain in what turned out to be his loin, if you know your butchery.
Being man?
No, but it's interesting because a loin is not a groin. And a loin is at the back near the kidneys. And so he's pointing to his loin and he says, yeah, I get this pain and it takes about a day and a half to come around the front and it stops about there and it hurts like hell and it feels like I'm going to piss. I'm allowing this guy to talk about and lead the listener from the presenting complaint to what is, for me, probably going to be the heart of the case. And I'm just letting the audience take in the information. And it does, as the case goes deeper and deeper, then the stories emerge about, this guy's difficult teenage years and all the rest of it. Lovely Perth naturopath, Michael Blanche. Michael puts his hand up and says, I think it's a Berberus case. And in that moment, what he did was cut through about 2 hours worth of teaching as we explore all sorts of remedies based around, different themes and psychodynamics and all the rest of it, which I then try. I give this guy lachesis, I give this guy a whole lot of different remedies, and eventually I give him Berberus, and it absolutely nails not only his presenting complaint, but everything else as well. So
you have just gotten to it, but because it goes back to what we talked about 2 times ago, totality. Is this a case about the presenting totality, the physical expression of the disease, or is it about his childhood?
Let's juxtapose that story. Oh, and by the way, I met this guy many years later walking down the street. I was in Glebe in Sydney. And it was, mate, how are you doing? And he said, I've not had that symptom ever since. Life is good. Just moved on and symptom free and happily so. And so I use that as a teaching case. Right? I'm not going to use the C word, but I use that as a teaching case to demonstrate a client that's in this state and now is in this state. Juxtapose that with the story where it was in Heidelberg, and I'm going to say 2007, so 20 years ago. And everybody was there. No, you weren't there.
I wasn't there. Where was I?
I don't know. Anyways,
Stuff.
big conference, big seminar in Heidelberg. And Rajan is on the stage. And it's a stage. And it's a big European town hall. Amazing.
And in those days, he was like on top of the world. The women were throwing their panties at him. He was like.
There was a bit of that. In
Oh,
fact,
yeah.
I introduced, do you know Stephen Gordon? Stephen Gordon?
No.
Stephen Gordon was the head of the ECCH at that point. He's passed on now. But I believe that he was introduced as the sensation of homeopathy.
Really?
That's how he was introduced.
It
And
was
it
like Beatles.
And he did an amazing show. And by that time, I'd met him at Rajan a couple of times, interviewed him, and sat with him in his clinic in Mumbai. But the point of the story is that he was discussing some aspect of sensation method and using using an example of a story. And he gives an intervention, he gives a homeopathic remedy. And then there's a pause and he says, and the patient did beautifully. And I remember thinking to myself at that point, just what constitutes a cured case? And at what point? And at what point can you start talking to people about it?
I want to give a couple of examples. And forgive me, everyone, that I'm eating my toast. I am.
You eat elegantly.
Thank you. I'm trying. And there's nothing on it. And I'm trying not to do any. But I'm starving and I'm back to back today. There's no break. And so it was either blood sugar meltdown or this. Anyway, so this is what I want to talk about, because I think there are all these different perspectives for us to consider. So, like, what constitutes, as Hahnemann would say, capital C cure? Well, in order to get to that, if you're talking about a chronic thing, you then have to understand, what did Hahnemann mean by that? What does it mean in the homeopathic sense? What is cure? It's different in something acute than in something chronic. We've talked about that. We talked about it last time. So I like to start these conversations with a simple bifurcation of acute versus chronic, and put acutes in their own bucket, chronic in their own bucket, and then talk about them individually because they're different animals. And Hahnemann knew this. Now, when we talk about chronic disease, this is why I love the study of the intellectual history of homeopathy, because you're forced to, and I learned this through studying medical history. The question is very different objectively than it is hagiographically. In other words, people look at homeopathy like it's this magic thing that Hahnemann crapped out one day. And it was just like, woo, and it's all, when in reality, this guy developed a system over time. And there was a purpose, because at the time he lived, he was looking, this is part of the sort of intellectual history, was to find the system, the cohesive system based on universal laws that would mimic, for example, Newton's work, right? Looking for how the laws of the universe would apply, and they apply universally, okay? And so the footnote to Aphorism 1, which I think people look at Aphorism 1 in the Organon, and it's like, oh, the physician's only highest calling, depending on what translation you're reading. And it becomes this, it's this beautiful thing we're called to it. All true.
To cure as it is termed.
To cure as it is termed. But when you go to the footnote of Aphorism 1, this is where Hahnemann tells us what this is about. He says, and for those of you who may have been introduced to fake homeopathy, listen closely. Footnote to Aphorism 1. And I like how Wenda has her sidebars, and she says theoretical medicine, right? The physician's calling is not to spin so-called systems from empty conceits and hypotheses concerning the inner vazon of life process and the origins of disease in the invisible interior of the organism, on which so many physicians mongering for fame, translate that to influencer, have hitherto wasted their time and energy. The physician's calling is not to make countless attempts at explanation regarding disease appearances and approximate cause, holding forth in unintelligible words or abstract and pompous expression in order to appear very learned and astonish the ignorant, while a sick world sighs in vain for help. Of such learned fanaticism, to which the name theoretical medicinal art is given, and for which special professorships are instituted, we have had quite enough. It is high time for all those who call themselves physicians, once and for all, to stop deceiving suffering humanity with idle talk and to begin now to act, that is, to really help and to cure. And that sets off his entire premise and intervention, consistently undergirded by the laws of the universe.
You say good.
I did, undergirded. You said loins. I could say undergirded, because we gird the loins, right? So might as well keep that up. Anyway, this is really important, because Hahnemann is saying there is a system by which this whole thing works. And then you have to look at what he's also saying, because he's putting everything in context. The context is these other things are superficial at best, right? They are empty conceits and hypotheses at worst.
But what about when the empty conceit and hypothesis has a story attached to it with a case?
That sort of takes us into a different conversation, right? Because then we start talking about the evidence hierarchy and how we perceive information. But I want to talk about this stuff seriously, because we have to start having the conversation in homeopathy about what are our expectations? What do we do? Who are we in this system, right? So if we are to be a system that says, this is the pill is everything. If you give the pill, if you use this pill, you're a homeopath. As opposed to this pill, when used according to its guidelines, has 230 years of safety and clinical evidence attached to it, you can feel confident that a person who is using the pill according to the principles will be highly unlikely to do harm. Full stop. Okay? That's just it. But that's not what we have today. That's not what we have. Right? And what we have are people who are deciding to have a conversation without knowledge, right? We've talked a number of times on this podcast about the Dunning-Kruger effect, unconscious incompetence. So if somebody, right, we heard about, luckily I don't listen to this stuff, but I get reports. I don't want to know the names of people, but apparently someone who has a big presence was asked on a podcast, where do the names of homeopathic remedies come from? And they didn't know. Hello, you need to know, where did they come from? Right? What is the Latin? What is the, there's so much to know about their remedies, right? And why? And also the why they're introduced. Anyway, this takes us though to the evolution of Hahnemann's thinking, because people love to say, especially the people, Dunning-Kruger, the unconscious incompetence, it's like, well, if Hahnemann had lived longer, he would have changed his mind. Well, I think that that's a really valid conversation to have, because he did evolve his system over time. 100%.
He would have definitely evolved.
But what he did was he managed to do the thing that had been the attempt from the end of the Enlightenment, which was to create a unified theory that encompassed the idea of health and healing. And Hahnemann did that. He did that. He said, based on the laws of the universe, based on natural principles, it is true that similars cure. And he goes on to give multiple examples, both in universal language. We always use the luminous moons of Jupiter example, but he also shows it in disease process, how a person who has an inflamed eye issue, who gets the measles, will be cured of the inflamed eye issue because of the stronger similar disease pattern of measles.
Until the measles is gone, and then the eye comes back.
Exactly. You speak up a little while. I can't hear you as well. So I think what we've got is Hahnemann, he figured out this, he cracked a certain code, which is really important. And we're not going to get into all of that today, but based on that, he then has the therapeutic interventions. He didn't just say, use the dynamized substance. He worked until 1834 to say that universally we use dynamized substances. 1834 is right.
From 1834, he used
1830s.
Yeah, that's right.
And then he goes on and he continues to develop it, and he gets to his sixth and final edition of the Organon, and the nuances around chronic diseases. And he says, I have not lived in vain. And he also says in the intro to chronic diseases that he could have kept it for himself, but he shares it with humanity because it does answer the question. So what is the question? And so anyway, I went on this little tangent about the intellectual history of homeopathy and sort of the context, because when you ask what cure means, if you're talking about in chronic disease, it does not just mean the simple eradication of the presenting complaint, because it has to be seen in the complex of all the possibility, which has to do with miasmatic disease, right? The problem that we have today is that miasmatic disease has been taken out of the Hahnemannian context, which is there is one root to all disease. There are two acquired venereal miasmatic diseases, that give us the basis for understanding this larger context. And as we talked about in last week's podcast, footnote to Aphorism 56, you don't solve a miasmatic problem with its same, that's isopathic. So to say, I have Crohn's and to give the Crohn's nosode and expect to have a cure, Hahnemann says, no, actually nothing but calamity and exacerbation of the disease will occur, full stop. So what he's saying in chronic diseases, their peculiar nature and their homeopathic cure, right, published in 5 installments from 1828 onward. I have to say that because there's a guy also stalking me online who says, I don't know anything. He just keeps stalking me. So I'm clarifying for his, you know who you are, Mr. What Hahnemann is saying here is that when a person is presenting with their chronic condition, you need to understand sort of where they are. Are they in the sort of newness and flowering of this disease? Has this been simmering for a long time? Is it mixed with other things? Are there lifestyle issues involved? You don't fix lifestyle issues with tautopathy and these so-called clears. You have to look at the whole case and understand it. And then what happens is the removal of, let's say, the removal of the obstacles, but also the stronger, similar anti-miasmatic remedy will neutralize that situation. But that doesn't necessarily mean cure. That could just mean that that miasmatic energy goes from being active to being latent, which could constitute the resumption of health, right? And so this is a complex conversation. This isn't like you learn how to do this from a podcast.
So this, so let me get clear, because I've always been under the misapprehension that treatment is done with the chronic case. You can stop treating the client when, firstly, they learn how to levitate. Secondly, they grow 3 inches, and third, when they start supporting the All Blacks.
And they always find a parking spot.
They always, the fourth one, they always find a parking spot wherever they want.
Yes. And no cellulite. No woman will ever lose.
I was thinking more about the men folk, because the prostate stays the size of a walnut forever.
Nice prostate, small prostate, steady stream.
Good stream. Really
got a good stream.
So that's a criteria of about 8 standards against which you can measure. Can I teach this case? And so that's the basis upon which I've been, telling stories. And how am I doing so far?
You know what? I've been teaching this one case. I alluded to this a little bit, and people who have come to conferences where I've spoken, I've got this one case I've now taught at multiple conferences over the course of, the first time I taught it was in Baltimore. Was that 2019?
Baltimore was I think it might have been
2018. So 8 years.
Because I drove from, oh no, that was the year before.
Anyway,
I think it was 19. Yeah.
2019. Right. This is a case of a dapper young man he's going off to college this year. And when I started working with him, he had 3 diagnoses. He was diagnosed with eosinophilic esophagitis at age 3. They upgraded his diagnosis to Crohn's disease at age 5, because at that point, I'm not sure what the criteria is, but they didn't diagnose Crohn's until 5. They're rescoping at 5. And also PANDAS. And that would have been a couple of years later, I think 3 years later. And he'd had what I would say was decent homeopathy care. I can't remember. I think it might have been a naturopath using homeopathy. I think the remedies were all good. The posology was not as nuanced as it might be. It was a lot of give a dose. It was a lot of 4th edition prescribing and then kind of moving around. But I wouldn't say it was bad homeopathy by any stretch. Also, it wasn't the crazy stuff that we see. Anyway, I started working with him, I want to say, if it was 8 years ago, and maybe he was 9 or 10. And so the first time I presented his case, it would have been within the first year, got him off his meds. He was on a very heavy duty medication called 6MP. And it has a lot of risks associated with it. It's associated with certain cancers, of blocking puberty. There are a lot of challenges. So naturally, People don't choose to be on that kind of medication unless there is a real reason. And so I started working with him, and I'm going to say it was within a year. I don't know what the timing is. His labs were good. And the gastroenterologist was like, let's get him off this taper immediately because it's a really highly toxic drug. And so he's been off it ever since. Now, of course, I get really nervous. But up until this point, he was still having to be on a restricted diet. He was gluten-free. He was, there were all these things that he couldn't do. And we slowly worked him through over the years. Now, things don't just disappear because you've got a living, breathing organism. He's growing. He hit puberty, right? All these things happen. But what was really interesting was at a certain point, we were in New Zealand. We're in New Zealand a lot, but it would have been after COVID, 2023, let's say. That sounds about right. And he had a barrage of acutes.
Well, I remember this.
You remember? It was terrifying.
And this is a good example because you've taught the case.
I've taught the case.
And then he gets his dramatic.
But I didn't teach it to say this is a cured case. I taught it to say this is a case that is moving in a direction of cure. We don't play God. We shouldn't play God because there's a lot of hubris in making claims, both legally, but also ethically, And anybody who's a human in a human body knows, okay, at what point are you completely free of anything? Especially if
when you levitate, you're 3 inches taller and you support the All Blacks.
And you always get a parking spot and you never get cellulite and you pee a great stream every night. That's it. Okay.
Sure.
So we come along and he was doing well. He was getting better. Things are going well. And then he has a year of lots and lots of acutes.
And then looking over your shoulder at the photo of the throat, that was incredible.
Oh, yeah. I think that he might have had a peritonsillar abscess. And so it was terrifying. And so the mom, who also happens to be a homeopath, was like, I'm not touching it. You know why? Because, and this is really important, we had gotten to the place. So we had healed to the point where he was going through the experience of the acute illnesses he had had between 18 months and 3 years old. There were medical interventions, there was suppression, and he resulted in a deeper chronic pattern. As he had the health status, these acutes started coming back up that were addressed, each one at the appropriate time. And after this big acute, another level of health achieved. It was brilliant. Brilliant. Now, what does that teach us? Now, somebody who's teaching this homeopathy where they say, well, you could have just given the clear for all of this, all the vaccines, all the drugs, give 6-MP in potency, do all that stuff. I can't even fathom, because what has happened here, first of all, you wouldn't be able to manage the case, but what we've done is we've built him to a better and better and better level of health. And this is really interesting, because this is where the sort of biomedical model and this newfangled homeopathy are banging into each other. Because if you look at it through the biomedicine idea, there's a germ, you kill it. Okay. There's another germ, you kill it. That germ could be a virus, a bacteria, a fungus, a parasite, whatever the case may be, but you're always trying to kill it. That reductionistic approach is a short-term gain. The long-term problem is a disrupted ecosystem. So you have a person who is no longer in harmony with the outside world. So then you start to develop allergies, or as we see now, MCAS, right? Mast cell activation syndrome. So we've traded off the short-term gains for these long-term problems. Protocols are going to do the same. You give all these things, it's not going to, there's no way. So anyway, so this kid, right? Once we get him to the point of health, he goes through acutes and he hits a new level of health. Now, here's what was really interesting. And this is why this case is fascinating to me. He developed a superficial thing that let's just say it was in a location where he wanted to see the doctor. It was very small, but and the doctor said, let's put a topical antifungal on it. And he was like, by now he's got agencies like 16, 17, something like that. And so mom said, what do you think about a topical antifungal? And I was like, you could try it, but let's see what happens. 2 doses of a topical antifungal and the case started to go off. Now we got it back on track and he's doing great. But I say this because it really teaches us about this other idea that we are reestablishing this beautiful harmony in the biome of the human internally, but also superficially, right? All the things that live under here and on our scalp and in our mouth and all of it. We have to be in symbiosis with the environment around us. And so this idea of homeopathy that you just throw a bunch of stuff at it and it all fixes itself at the same time because this whatever reason, no reason, is when you look at it from the standpoint of this long-term process of, as Hahnemann calls it, the restoration of health, right? Then you have long-lasting cure on some level. I don't like to use that word. I like to use this, that being on the trajectory of better health. Are there blips along the way? Sure. Can I give one more example? Sorry, I know there's this thing in the Waldorf world. So anybody who's in a Steiner environment. So they talk about the 9-year change. And also in 3rd grade is a time when the whole class can get sick. And it's like a thing, right? And I remember when number 2 was in 3rd grade and they all got sick. They all got strep throat. And there were the kids that got on antibiotics back to school in 3 days. There were the kids that were using homeopathy, other integrative approaches, and came back to school in maybe 10 days, 2 weeks, depending on what it was. Like, was it fun to have it? Because I had a kid home for 2 weeks, right? But the kids who sort of had the fast approach, they got it again and again. The kids who were going through this sort of evolution of lifetime, who experienced healing because their body learned how to be in symbiosis with these other external factors to get it back into harmony, came back. I don't want to say stronger because I don't want to make a comparative statement, but it was an event that taught me a lot, and that was what, 20 years ago, 18 years ago. What do you think about that idea of sort of this long-term trajectory to health when you're talking about chronic disease versus?
I see that. That's what I see. But that's what I see. It would be really good to look at some good longitudinal studies about the chronic health status of folks that have been using homeopathy for a long time. There's a couple of them out there. But so yeah, I hear you. I wonder, just going back to the beginning again, because at the very beginning you said, I want to talk about chronic and acute and the difference between them in relationship to cure.
Yeah.
And so I don't think you've spoken about acute. Like, at what point do you go, I can talk about this case, or this case is done? At what point do we articulate what's going on and teach the next generation coming through?
If it's a true acute, you either get over it or you don't, and you get over it in a reasonable amount of time. So I think teaching acutes, you're not waiting 3 months or 6 years to evaluate, because you do need longitudinal data to understand if you're talking about a chronic, just to go back to that for a second, the way you know that a case is on the trajectory is that they're feeling better. They are feeling better in themselves. There's a clarity, and the symptoms, the exacerbations should become less intense, less frequent, and for less duration. And it's a process. And the more medicinal suppression, the more you're unraveling, but the person shouldn't be suffering along the way. The funny thing is that this new conversation about how you do this, right? It's like, the automating people can't do it. So we have to drop bombs on people. And are they going to suffer? I've heard people recently say, well, we had an event where a couple of the people who attended said, oh yeah, I was seeing this protocol person. They gave me 12 million remedies and I was covered with sores from head to toe. And they told me that was good. We talked about that lesson. That's not good.
That's not quite gentle, is it? So for me,
on the risk of infection, think about all the things that's blowing up the immune system to do something that, and oftentimes those people aren't saying, oh, that's part of a curative response. Because you see, when we talk about, let's talk about this miasmatic idea though, because I think that's important because people are conflating a couple of things. So when Hahnemann gets this idea of chronic disease, my research is pointing toward the fact that he got there through his understanding of syphilis and mercurial compounds as part of the quote unquote, cure or treatment of syphilis.
Mhm.
And he was Hahnemann's first major contribution to the chemical canon was soluble mercury. And that's before homeopathy. And that tells us he would be familiar with syphilis, but also the understanding of the treatment and the use of mercury compounds there. But my research basically demonstrates, I mean, obviously I keep going with it and maybe it'll change, but I feel pretty confident about this, that it was the understanding of the progression of the syphilitic disease that helped Hahnemann to understand miasmatic disease as a concept that he then moved on to SORA after. So syphilis comes before SORA in the intellectual evolution.
We understand it these days as being different aspects of primary syphilis or tertiary syphilis, but he's looking at those, say, skin lesions in secondary syphilis and looking at those and comparing them to the symptoms that we would know these days from tertiary syphilis and saying, you're part of the same disease.
And he says, oh, this is interesting because the external superficial treatment of this disease does not eradicate the internal disease. Disease affects the person in their entirety. Therefore, a person who is treated superficially, cutaneously for syphilis will not be cured of the internal disease. Therefore, if they progress and you start to treat them in such a way that is going to get rid of that disease, then that superficial lesion or some form of it should return as a part of the curative process. That's where that comes from. Okay. And similarly, when he is beginning to and continuing to have his discussions about SORA and psoriatic disease, what he's saying is there will be often unnoticed some expression on the skin, some cutaneous manifestation. Well, might not even notice it. And then it becomes a part of the interior disease. Therefore, as a part of the healing process, that may show itself again, right? This has become a completely different conversation where people say the skin is the vent. That's an allopathic idea, okay? This skin as a quote unquote vent and this idea you get covered in sores as part of, your prize for taking 15 million homeopathic remedies at a time is crazy town, because that is not a part of the healing process. That is an exacerbation. That is pushing the body out of health and into more suffering. And it's making the person more susceptible to a superficial infection, for example, right? So just to wrap this up, I think that when people are talking about cure, they need to, or actually I should say it a different way, because the people who are hawking these wares, these nostrums, basically this fake homeopathy is just, it's charlatan nostrum delivery, like we saw, like they used to call homeopaths back in the day, right? Pushing it into that territory. Sorry to be so blunt about it, but in reality, this incredible medicine is gentle and it moves a person slowly and surely back to the highest level of health available to them. And the way to get there is by making sure that anything that is asked of the vitality, the vital force, the immune system, however you want to call it, that whatever you're giving, right? You give a remedy, the remedy doesn't do anything. The vital force has to respond, that there is enough energy to respond and that the response is used intelligently. If you drop a bomb on someone, they have to respond to everything.
Totally, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like a fight or flight.
Yeah, I want you to say something again, though, and I want to tweak it because it's really, really important, folks, and that is the remedy does nothing. So that part is not quite, as I understand it, from the physics and from the latest research, because the nature of the remedy's got to be accurate to fit the key in the lock, because there's a lock. Once the key opens the lock, then you're totally right. It's the vital force that does the work and the resilience of the vital force that does that. But it's not as if the remedy doesn't do anything. You're totally right about that, but it's got to be a good remedy. It's got to be a similar remedy. Boom, open up, and then the vital force can move.
But I wonder if there's like a little bit more scaffolding to build around that, because what we are seeing now is that the bombardment is not without effect.
Oh, see, that's really interesting.
What I'm saying?
Yeah. I'm still, because when you said that, I immediately flipped into Iris Bell mode.
Exactly. The hormesis, right?
And if we are complex adaptive systems, and then for a complex adaptive system to be bombarded with hundreds of messages at once, no way. I don't think there's any capacity for a meaningful resistance to those messages from the vital force.
Exactly. All right. Now, let's wrap it up, because we've got a couple of listener questions and comments. I want to wrap it up with one other thing. I think I want to start having mansplain corner. And so some of the things that we've been mansplained on that I kind of get a kick out of is when people who haven't listened to the whole podcast, but they watch the reel and then they have a rant and they say, you don't understand that. So one of the things that there is an assumption that we don't understand is that there are some nosodes and sarcodes for which there are provings. Just to be clear, we do understand that. We also understand that some of those provings are inadequate. Some of them are based only on superficial clinical symptoms, like a lot of Samuel Swan's provings of nosodes. He says it in his own, you can find the quote, I don't have it handy today, but Samuel Swan says, we don't need to do provings on these drugs because we already have them from our clinical information. That is also true. Some of the substances we don't have any data on. We also don't have data on what happens when you give multiple and repeated doses of any homeopathic remedy, but especially those made from the byproducts of disease, healthy human tissue, or allopathic medicines. So if a person is taking a quote unquote clear of a vaccine, how do you know that that is not causing, any kind of an issue that you're worried about having a vaccine? So I think that we need to be much more discerning instead of looking at homeopathy as a magic trick that anybody can do, rather to say, this is a form of medicine that requires judicious use. Okay. So that's mansplain corner. Maybe I should girl splain. This would be my
Well, I think, there's a little bit of that, but I would invite the menfolk that want to splain Denise, especially splain Denise, to
bring it on.
Now, I'm going to read to you.
Bring your research.
Note from one of our supervisors, and it's one for you actually. So it's a nice message, which I'm going to read to you. It says, "I got to thank Denise."
Wait, who's it from?
It's from Ashley.
Ashley H.
Yeah, I want to thank Denise for introducing me to the remedy QRA years ago in the chronic clinic. I remember she said something to the effect that she understood it felt unfair that we did all of this repertory work and remedies like QRA did not come to the top for consideration, and then explained how it fit really beautifully into a particular case. Well, I've got a case at the moment and I recommended QRA for, and this client is experiencing some pain relief for the first time in years. Thank you for introducing these small remedies, because sometimes they make all the difference.
Thanks, Ashley.
How about that?
I love that. One of the things that's really fun about clinic. So if you come to school at AG, when you come to clinic, we don't just give you the menu. If they say this, do this. You have to discern and figure out. And we had such a great time doing it. And one of the things that we do is we deconstruct a case and put it back together. We analyze it in all, we evaluate all the different possibilities. And then of course there's the finding the remedy. And I remember this case so clearly because curare, if you're not familiar with it, it's in the same family as Noxvomica and Gelsemium and Ignatia, and it shares similar qualities to those remedies. It's an arrow poison. And so when we were analyzing this case, those remedies in the same family were coming up in our differential. Curare is a small remedy. It just doesn't present itself. Now, having learned that remedy when I was a student by my favorite, the late Eric Zimmerman, rest his soul. I just remembered him talking about it. I think he may have even shared a case or two. I forget, but I thought, oh, and I also teach it in a neurologic therapeutic differential, curare and Lathyrus, which is chickpea. Anyway, and so we did a different form of analysis. So we had a hunch, and then we worked backwards of how to find it. And it was a really, good. I love it. And then there's just one more thing here from episode 120. Crazy John Smith says the fact that nosodes, etc., can occasionally be useful does not excuse their excessive and misplaced use, which is mainly on allopathic paradigms, dilution of homeopathic principles. Thank you, Crazy John. You don't sound crazy.
You ain't so crazy to me.
Are you kidding? We love you.
No, it's John.
And then episode 121, homeopaths saying you can't do XYZ with homeopathy. This is my favorite. Exactly. So many homeopaths, and they put them in quotes, claiming that homeopathy can't do something, when in fact, it's that the practitioner is incapable, and worse, they either cannot and will not learn how. And that comes from David Kempson. I want to give a shout out to David, David makes amazing social media posts, and I feel like we're kindred spirits because he's just totally on the same page with us. So thanks for that, David, and thanks for doing the social media dirty work when we just cannot. We appreciate it. All right, people.
Good stuff. All right, that's it. All right. Right over. See you later.
Take her easy.
AHE is changing the face of homeopathy education by raising the bar through rigorous academics and unparalleled clinical training delivered live through the soulful use of cutting-edge technology. AHE prepares its students to become fully rounded homeopathic practitioners from anywhere in the world. Apply today at ahe.online.